An ancient stone inscription was found in Israel around the 2000s. Interestingly, one of its lines reads as follows: "In 3 days, live." That's how at least some scholars translated it. If true, what could this imply? Resurrection of the Messiah. Some went on to make even far-fetching claim that early Christian belief in resurrection of the Messiah could have been borrowed from Jewish beliefs found in this very inscription. In other words, some claim that this inscription could shatter the Christian resurrection story that believers hold dearly for the last 2,000 years.
This is a photograph of a unique and mysterious 2,000-year-old tablet or stone. This is the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, where Christians come to celebrate and commemorate the resurrection of Jesus 3 days after the crucifixion. This may shake up that. The stone emerged from the antiquities market, and incredibly, the ancient Hebrew text can still, for the most part, be easily read. The key line is this: "I, Gabriel, command you, the Prince of Princes, in 3 days, live."
In this brief segment, I would like to go over some of the key facts about this inscription. Where did it come from? When was it composed? Does it truly refer to resurrection in 3 days? How to make sense of this finding as a Christian, someone who believes in the resurrected Messiah, Jesus Christ? Let's find answers to these questions and more in this video. Welcome to Discern Scripture YouTube channel. We post videos regularly on various biblical topics. We would really appreciate if you subscribe and help us reach a wider audience. We are committed to bring unique content and fresh perspective to our analysis that will inform mind and strengthen faith. Please feel free to look through our recent series and other videos and share them with those that might be interested. Now let's get on with the video. Gabriel Vision Inscription, a brief analysis. Let's first look at where was this inscription found. This inscription was not found in any archaeological excavation. It's told that a Bedouin man in Jordan, on the eastern banks of the Dead Sea, found this stone inscription first. It changed hands several times and was finally procured by a Swiss-Israeli antiquities collector from Zurich, Dr. David Jaselson. This inscription was studied by Hebrew paleographers and epigraphers. The first academic publication on this inscription came out in 2007. Most scholars tentatively find this inscription to be authentic. However, there are few who still question the authenticity of this inscription in the academia. Let's look at the description of Gabriel Vision Inscription. The inscription is about 96 centimeters to 37 centimeters in size. It's broken in 3 pieces. It's made of a very large piece of limestone of light gray color, polished on the one side and rough on the other side. The text is not inscribed, but it is written using ink on the polished side. Writing is poorly preserved and has several gaps. It contains 87 lines in 2 columns. The column on the right contains 44 lines, and the left it contains 43 lines. Let's look at the dating of this inscription. This inscription does not make any direct historical references. Therefore, it is quite hard to date it to any specific time period. Different scholars have made attempts to date it to different periods. At the time of Herod's death in 4 BC, or other Jewish revolts against the Romans at different periods of time. The Gabriel inscription underwent scientific testing, including analysis of the patina on the stone and the script used in the inscription. These analyses, along with comparative studies with other ancient inscriptions, supported the conclusion that the inscription dates back to aligning with the period of Second Temple in ancient Israel. What's the message of this inscription? The inscription of the stone depicts a dialogue between the angel Gabriel and a figure often interpreted as a messianic leader, possibly drawing inspiration from the biblical figure of Daniel. It's written in apocalyptic and prophetic forms, similar to the book of Daniel or Revelation in the New Testament. Gabriel Revelation stone communicates a message of hope, emphasizing a belief in divine intervention, redemption, and the eventual establishment of God's kingdom on earth. It reflects the apocalyptic and messianic expectations prevalent in the Second Temple Judaism, offering insights into the religious and ideological landscapes of that time. Now let's look at line number 80, which is the most important line in this inscription. In 3 days. Line 80 in the second column on the left is the one that draws a lot of attention to this otherwise relatively insignificant limestone inscription. Literally, line 80 is a fragment. It is incomplete and has lacunas or gaps. So the literal reading of line 80 would be somewhat like this. In 3 days, I, Gabriel. As you can see, there are gaps. So scholars fill in the gaps and provide possible readings. In 2008, Israel Knohl proposed one of such readings and brought this text to the front lines of controversy. He translated it this way: I, Gabriel, command you, the Prince of Princes, in 3 days, live. The clip we saw from the introduction, it follows this line of reconstruction of the line following Israel Knohl. Let's now turn to Israel Knohl, his theory behind the reconstruction of line 80, and what he thinks of these lines and the resurrection of Jesus Christ as recorded in the New Testament and have been believed by Christians for 2 millennia. Part 2, Israel Knohl's theory. Israel Knohl is an Israeli biblical scholar and a historian. He's a professor of biblical studies at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. In 2008, shortly after the primary reports of this inscription was published, Israel Knohl published a series of articles and books, Messiahs and the Resurrection in the Gabriel Revelation. That's where he lays out his theory. He translates line 80 as follows: by 3 days live, I, Gabriel, command you. He proposed that the person referred by Gabriel here is Simon of Perea, who was one of the rebel leaders killed by the Romans shortly after the death of Herod the Great in 4 BC, around the same time of Jesus' birth. In fact, Simon of Perea's death was recorded by historians such as Josephus and Tacitus. This is what Flavius Josephus wrote about Simon's rebellion and his death. There was also Simon, who had been a slave of King Herod. This man was elevated at the disorderly state of things and was so bold as to put a diadem on his head, while a certain number of the people stood by him, and by them he was declared to be a king. He burned down the royal palace at Jericho and plundered what was left in it. He also set fire to many other of the king's houses in several places of the country, utterly destroyed them, and permitted those that were with him to take what was left in them for a prey. He would have done more evil, but care was taken to repress him immediately. The commander of the Herod's infantry, Gratus, joined himself to some Roman soldiers, took the forces and met Simon. And after a great and long fight, no small part of those that had come from Perea were destroyed. Although Simon had saved himself by flying away through the valley, Gratus overtook him and cut off his head. Tacitus makes a brief reference about this Simon as well. This is what Tacitus says. At Herod's death, without waiting for an imperial decision, a certain Simon usurped the title of the king. He was dealt with by the governor of Syria, Quintilius Varus, while the Jews were divided up into 3 kingdoms ruled by Herod's sons. So based on these references from the ancient historians, this is what Knohl proposed. Line 80 of the Gabriel Revelation inscription refers to Simon of Perea, who was killed by the Romans in 4 BC. In the inscription, Gabriel commands him to live in 3 days. That is the hint to resurrection on the 3rd day, quite similar to the belief of the early Christians about the resurrection of Jesus on the 3rd day. And so Knohl went on to quite triumphantly proclaim, this calls for a complete reassessment of all previous scholarship on the subject of messianism, Jewish and Christian alike. He claimed that the historical Jesus was a rebel like Simon of Perea who got killed by the Romans for his activism against them. When Jesus died, his followers made up the story of resurrection based on earlier Jewish beliefs that existed around Simon of Perea. In other words, what the writer of Gabriel Revelation Inscription spoke of Simon of Perea, Jesus' followers applied to Jesus and then spread it around as truth.
That in truth, Jesus never said that he is the Messiah. They say it is impossible that Jesus spoke in this language because the conception of a suffering, dying and rising Messiah was not part of Judaism of the time of Jesus. But now something dramatically new happened. We have this text written in the time of the birth of Jesus. So the historical Jesus could very much indeed speak in this language, because the concept of a suffering, dying, and rising Messiah was known in the time of Jesus. It was a concept which developed in a small circle of Jews in the time of Jesus. These were the followers of Simon.
However, Knohl's reconstruction of line 80 was rejected by other Hebrew and Semitic scholars. In 3 days, the sign. This is the most accepted reconstruction of line 80. In line 17 to 19 and line number 54 and line number 80, we have the references to 3 days. Most scholars today recognize that in 3 days, the sign is a much more appropriate reconstruction of line 80 in view of these prior occurrences. Line 77 to 80 can be read like this. Who are you? I am Gabriel, the angel sent by the Lord, and you shall rescue them. A prophet and a shepherd shall rescue you. Then I ask you for 3 shepherds, for 3 prophets. On the 3rd day, the sign, I am Gabriel, king of the angels, the prince of princes, of those who are close to the courts. So Knohl's theory of Jesus' resurrection, inspired by earlier Jewish belief in a 3rd-day resurrection, did not find any following. So Knohl himself abandoned this reconstruction of line 80. However, people like Shimha Jacovici, they like to sensationalize simple findings and ignore nuances. They go on to making documentaries following the abandoned theory of Knohl and his dubious and discarded translation. Let's make a brief assessment. In the year 2002, Israel Knohl already published a book titled The Messiah Before Jesus, the Suffering Servant of the Dead Sea Scrolls. So he promotes the idea that the messianic conception of the New Testament Christianity is neither new nor unique. So when this Gabriel inscription came to light, he rushed to push his preconceived notion into the gap found in the text. The first academic report of this inscription, it highlighted with a gap. In 3 days, I, Gabriel. But Israel Knohl inserted live into the lines without paying attention to the internal cues of the text. He was not deriving that from the inscription itself, rather using the inscription to buttress his already made up conclusions about the Messiah. As a result, for a while, this inscription went around causing a stir. As more scholars studied the 87 lines of this inscription and put it under rigorous analysis, they found Israel Knohl's explanation is simply untenable. Today, Knohl himself has abandoned his own reconstruction. In 3 days, the sign, it is the popular, accepted reconstruction of line 80. This inscription does not refer to resurrection at all. It's about a generic belief that on the 3rd day, the Lord will give a sign for deliverance or divine intervention. This is a common motif found in the Old Testament itself. Its presence in Gabriel inscription simply tells its Jewish roots, nothing more than that. Knohl's agenda-driven insertion, it remains as a textbook example of distortion and manipulation of ancient text to undermine the most important tenet of Christianity, that is the resurrection of Christ. The scholars who studied the text later on, they exposed this obvious discrepancy. Now, how to make sense of Gabriel Vision Inscription in 3 days? This inscription does not have any direct relationship with the idea of resurrection found in the New Testament. In fact, the general consensus is that it does not even refer to resurrection in line 80. This is the common understanding of line 80. On the 3rd day, the sign. The Gabriel text repeatedly promises a sign of redemption on the 3rd day. You can see that in line 17 to 19 and line 54 and line 80. The reference to in 3 days in Gabriel inscription is quite striking. It shows that there could be a breakthrough on the 3rd day. Gabriel inscription parallels the sayings referred to the 3rd day in the Gospels. There are quite a few references to the 3rd day in the New Testament. Matthew chapter 12 verse 40. For just as Jonah was 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of the great fish, so will the Son of Man be 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth. Luke 24:46. This is what is written. The Messiah will suffer and rise from the dead on the 3rd day. John chapter 2, verse 19, Jesus answered them, "Destroy this temple, and I will raise it again in 3 days." 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verse 4, that he was buried and that he was raised on the third day according to the scriptures. The gospel references to in the third day, they are drawn mainly from the Old Testament passages. Hosea chapter 6, verse 2, after 2 days he will revive us. On the third day he will restore us, that we may live in his presence. In Genesis chapter 22, verse 4, on the third day, Abraham looked up and saw the place in the distance. Exodus chapter 19, verse 11, and be ready by the third day. 19:15, prepare yourself for the third day. As these scriptures point out, third day is a time of breakthrough. On the third day, Abraham saw the place of offering in distance and symbolically received his son back from the dead. In Luke 24:46 and 1 Corinthians 15:4, a divine breakthrough on the third day is promised following these scriptural references from the Old Testament. Here is my closing reflection. In the time of the first century, there were diverse messianic beliefs among the Jews. Sects like the Essenes who lived in Qumran and others held strong apocalyptic views like what we see on the Gabriel stone inscription. The Essenes also believed in two messiahs, the Messiah ben David or the King Messiah and Messiah ben Joseph or the priestly Messiah. There was a belief that the Messiah ben Joseph or the priestly Messiah would be killed. However, no other Jewish sect believed that a dead or a murdered rebel leader or a messianic leader would be resurrected. What happened when a messianic leader was killed by the Romans? His followers either disbanded completely or joined other existing liberation movements and continued their resistance. No one went around claiming that their dead Messiah was alive. It never happened in history. What happened to the followers of Simon of Perea and the rebel movement that he created? It simply fizzled out. That's the fate of all messianic movements after the death of their leaders. On the contrary, resurrection of Jesus became the central part of all of Jesus' disciples' future mission and proclamation. The central message of Peter on the day of Pentecost was resurrection. Everywhere the disciples went and preached, they preached the suffering, death, burial, and the resurrection of Jesus. When scholars like Israel Knohl attempt to undermine historically monumental event like resurrection, they end up embarrassing themselves for making far-fetched claims based on flimsy, thin evidence. Jesus' resurrection is simply unparalleled in history. Jesus foretold that he would lay down his life as a ransom for many. Mark chapter 10, verse 45. For even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many. He also said that he had the power to lay down his life and take it up again. He did take it up. On the third day, he rose again from the dead. And the movement that he breathed into existence continued to grow and expand into every corner of this earth. This is what Jesus said in John chapter 11, verse 25. I am the resurrection and the life. The one who believes in me will live, even though they die. And whoever lives by believing in me will never die. We continue to believe and proclaim salvation in the name of Jesus Christ and call everyone to believe in his vicarious death in our place and victorious resurrection on the third day, that they too may live forever with Jesus in eternity. And that is our resurrection hope, and that is our joy in Christ. Thank you for watching this video. If you haven't subscribed to our channel, please do subscribe and support our channel. Click on the bell icon so that you can get notification whenever we post a new video. Also, feel free to leave your thoughts and questions in the comment section below. God bless you all. Shalom.